Creating a neat, attractive neckline is a straightforward skill that makes a big difference in the final appearance of your sweater or top. In this video, I will show you how to bind off stitches in the middle of row easily and correctly, how to join yarn invisibly, and how to create a beautiful smooth neckline while working on a neck shaping, finishing right and left shoulders section at the same time and from 2 skeins of yarn. First, I need to place 2 stitch markers both sides of my central stitches, which I am going to bind off. This step is optional. You can just count your shoulder stitches while knitting to your middle ones, but I'm placing markers in order to show you the whole process more clearly. Next step, I'm preparing my second skein of yarn, which I am going to use for knitting of my second shoulder section, the one after the neck opening. I'm knitting my next row up to the last stitch before my first marker. I am taking the second skein and knit my next stitch with both skeins of yarn, holding them together. This step would help us to avoid holes in the place where we join our second ball of yarn and prevent a knot too. Now I remove my first marker and start binding off stitches knitwise as I normally do it for any knit fabric. For my top, I need to bind off 16 stitches, and I'm closing stitches up to my second marker. As the very first step of bind off involved 2 stitches, I knitted 2 stitches and then slipped the first one over the second one. Now we have 1 stitch left on our right needle as we reached our second marker. But at this point, we did bind off just 15 stitches. So I need to remove my marker and bind off another stitch. So now I've bound off 16 stitches and I used my second or new skein of yarn for this. And I continue knitting with the skein to the end of row. As you can see, now I need to continue knitting 2 shoulders simultaneously, one shoulder from one skein and another one from the second. So now I'm turning my knitting for the next row and continue working from 2 skeins of yarn as I've just explained. So I'm knitting my first shoulder section with the first skein of yarn. I'm in the skein facing my right hand, so it is the first skein in the current working row. And I purl up to 1 stitch before the neck opening. I'm not working the last stitch because I want to prevent any bumps, laddering, and to make my neckline neat and pretty, and I will close the stitch in the following row and I will show you how. But now I need to take my second skein of yarn, and at this step I'm going to bind off a portion of stitches for neck shaping. And here is another trick. I'm slipping the very first stitch purlwise with yarn at front, tightening the loose end of yarn, purl next stitch and slip the first just slip stitch over. So 1 stitch is bound off. I continue binding off stitches as per pattern. Now continue purling to end of row. Now I'm turning my knitting for the next right side row and working pattern to the last stitch, the same way as I've just done for my previous row. Again, I slip my last stitch without knitting it, keeping working yarn at the back. And now I need to continue working the second part of my row from another skein of yarn. So now I need to slip my first stitch, slip my second stitch and place the first stitch over the second stitch. Here I've just did bind off one stitch. I knit the next stitch and slip the first stitch on my right needle over this knitted stitch. So now I continue until I bind off all required quantity of stitches by the pattern. Then I continue knitting to end of row. I'm going to repeat those easy steps until I would bind off all necessary stitches, and then I'm going to continue knitting straight from 2 skeins of yarn. As you can see, those little easy steps help to create a beautiful, neat and smooth neckline, and it also would help us to pick up stitches neatly and correctly for the neckband. I hope you've enjoyed watching this little tutorial and it would help you to master your knitting technique and help with your knitting project. Hope to see you in my next tutorial. Remember to subscribe to my channel. Take care and until next time, happy knitting!